This session is titled, What is the Future for Buy-to-Let? It's going to be run by Kate Faulkner from Designs on Property, who is going to use her experience as an expert in the property industry to look at the upcoming issues and opportunities in the buy-to-let market. By way of an introduction, Kate is one of the UK's leading property experts, and on a monthly basis, Kate summarises what's happening to property prices and rents and the impact that has on consumers and indeed to our industry. Kate has written 6 property books, including 4 for the consumer organisation Which. Kate presents at seminars almost every week to landlords, investors and to first-time buyers. And from a media perspective, Kate is very well known, and her appearances include BBC Breakfast News, Your Money, GMTV, ITV, Radio 4, You and Yours, The Big Question and 5 Live. In the last 12 months, Kate has carried out over 15 TV and radio interviews and has been quoted every month in major newspapers and magazines. So without further ado, can we please welcome Kate?
I realise why I'm so tired now, quite frankly. You forget what you get up and do during the day, don't you? Firstly, thanks very much for coming. Appreciate it's 9:30 in the morning, which is never a good time to start in London. So just for those that don't know you, thanks for my introduction. One of the things that I do is a little bit different, because the only thing I care about is that if a consumer is going out to go and purchase a buy-to-let property, they do it properly and they are successful. That's what I'm interested in. Now, half of my time is spent with the industry, people such as yourselves, and unusually right across the residential property market. And we earn our money out of companies who use our services to help them communicate with their consumers better. To give you an idea of the sorts of things we do, you may have heard of a company called Belvoir Lettings, national franchise. They were a letting specialist. We've moved them to be a buy-to-let specialist, because that way they look after a landlord for the whole lifetime. From starting the purchase of buy-to-let, they can go and see them. They will know the area like the back of their hand from a buy-to-let perspective, right through to the time when, if they want to exit their portfolio, for example, or even indeed passing it on to their family. So a very, very different way to most letting agents. I think most of you have probably heard of Build Store. So I used to work for Raymond, and I actually put my business to one side for a year to set up the self-build and renovation centre, run all the sales and marketing, and get board approval to get that launched. And that is just, if you haven't been, I know anybody in London gets slightly allergic to leaving outside the M25. I know it's in Swindon, but you don't have to go there. So that's good news. It's literally just off the motorway. And it is an amazing centre, so consumers can just come, find a plot of land, find the financing, and talk to architects, all sorts of people. So an incredible service that it delivers, right through to maybe just even writing an article for someone. Fortunately, when you've been on the TV, people pay you nice sums of money to write little articles to go on their websites. So that's how we earn our money. But Which withdrew their property books a few years ago because they couldn't make money out of them, which is quite a surprise. And as a result of that, I didn't feel there was anything that would give consumers a free, independent, up-to-date advice service on property. So I set up a company which is, set up a website, propertychecklist.co.uk, and we've been working for 6 or 7 years to try and understand how we get consumers to stop, look and listen in this market. If they're going to buy a car, they'll do a ton of research beforehand. They won't just put in a postcode and buy the first car that comes up on Rightmove that they like. Or if they even health and beauty, they'll spend more time buying shoes and working out which are the best fashion this year, boys and girls. And they'll go and do that. When it comes to property, if they're renting, they're just going to put in a little postcode into Rightmove and they'll just go off and rent. All sorts of nightmares happen as a result, and I have to try and sort those problems out afterwards. So that's what I do. And what I want to talk to you about buy-to-let, I very, very much come from this from a landlord's perspective and from what's happening countrywide. For me, we're far too London-centric with our reporting on property, and I think that's extraordinarily dangerous, and you'll see why. I am a fan of buy-to-let, just in case you think I'm not halfway through the presentation when it gets a bit depressing. But then I'll cheer you all up at the end, because I know nobody wants to go home sad. So I'll talk about why buy-to-let works as an investment. I kind of know you know, but there's some interesting facts and figures, and I look at things in a slightly different way to most people, I think. If you all look at it the same way as me, then fabulous. Whereas success has been achieved, because there's no doubt it's been an unbelievable successful investment, But there is also no doubt it has bankrupted many people in this country, and if a lot of people aren't bankrupted now, they will be shortly. So there are big problems ahead. Now, I came down from Newark this morning, and I live near a lovely place called Lincoln. And our property market's a little bit different to the London one. But it's useful because I've got friends there who set up businesses back in 1996, so they knew what all the stats were when buy-to-let started to become a real kind of business. The average property price, can you imagine this? £32,000, only 5 figures. Don't really see that much in London anymore. And let's imagine that they bought that on a loan to value, which the average landlord will have these days, of about 50%. This is how the numbers would have worked out. What an amazing yield, 10%. In your minds, I know you're already thinking, blimey, I don't think we quite get that anymore. And it's very, very rare. And this is one of my big beef at this moment in time, which is what I'd love to chat to you afterwards. I think the 125%, 130% is a complete failed model. I do not believe that should ever be applied because I don't think it works anymore. And partly what I've got here today is why that is the case. I love the Hanley Building Society puts up its standard variable rate history, so feel free to go and run these numbers on your own stuff. But back in 1996, you'd have had a 7% mortgage. I've taken it as a 50%, so they've got 50%, so they've borrowed 16 grand. That would have been the cost over the year, and their other costs I've estimated at just a little bit less than that. So to be walking away with a net income of about £1,000. But when you've got houses out at £32,000, £1,000 is actually quite a lot when you put it in your back pocket, even when you have to pay tax on top of that. So that's where we started in buy-to-let. Well, where are we today? And what I've done is, what I'm going to do is going to have the figures on the left that you've just seen. But the most underused analysis is that very few people in buy-to-let, and certainly very few landlords, are taking into account the impact of inflation. When you start looking at inflation and how that's impacting on buy-to-let, nothing is anywhere near as rosy as it first appears. And that is a really serious issue because a lot of these people are investing for the long term. It's a 15, 20-year investment period typically, and a lot of them are investing for a pension. Don't get me started on that, we'll be here for another hour, but I'm sure we'll chat about it later. So, wonderful success. The average price of £32,000 of property now would sell at £84,000. If you looked at the inflation racking up, that would run to 53.6. So, absolutely, totally beaten inflation, and it's probably during its time beaten gold and stocks and shares and all sorts of other things. So an incredible performance, tremendously well done. But interestingly, one of the opportunities for you that I'd like to challenge you with is why are 30% of people running around with buy-to-lets without a mortgage? Because the person who bought that property for £32,000, it's got to have grown to at least £53,600 plus the costs of buying and selling for them to make money out of it. Now that's okay over this time period because that's been successful, but it certainly hasn't if you bought just before the credit crunch, as I'm sure you'll all know. So the first thing is I go running around going, what are you doing holding it with cash, you twit? Because I can talk to them like that. They don't pay me anything, so I can kind of say what I like. It is quite nice. So as far as that's concerned, the one thing I would say is that people don't see the value. They go, oh, I've got a property and I bought it for £100,000 and 6% return, and that'll beat the bank. Well, I'm not sure it will, and I'll show you that a little bit more later. Now, here's very, very interesting. If we take that rent, so if you remember it was £3,300 and we apply inflation, we'd want it to be about £5,500. And in actual fact, you'd get about 6,300 now. That is extraordinarily rare. The majority of rents are not keeping up with inflation at all. So much so that because social housing applies rent increases with inflation plus, since 2008, the English Housing Survey will tell you that rents in the social sector, albeit they're from a lower base, have run at twice the rate, twice as fast, twice as high than in the private sector. So that is quite unusual, but look at that drop in yield. But we're still using 125 and 130%, even though the yield has gone down quite substantially. But it does meet the criteria, and we've got a much lower mortgage rate. Now, I tried to get my head around this, you'll probably be faster than me. So if you took the mortgage on a £32,000 property that was at 50% and you added inflation to it, you'd be paying about £1,800 now, okay? But that property is now £84,000. It's a lot higher price, and even though the mortgage rate has dropped substantially, you're paying now £2,500. So you're paying a lot extra out in the mortgage than you did before, and your costs have gone up substantially. EPCs, gas safety certificates, all the work that you have to do now to make a property legal is expensive. And it has substantially added to the running costs of a buy-to-let property. And again, I'm not sure that these things are being factored in when it comes to what makes a successful buy-to-let. So that's basically on the sums. And when you look at it at a net income, if you take that original 995 net income I'd have been putting in my back pocket in 96, that should be up to 1,600 today. But it's not. When you take off all of the other costs, because of the increase in price and the increase in running costs of a buy-to-let, you're only netting out now 1,100. And then something else is going to happen by 2020, as we all know. There's a tax whammy on its way. And that is going to have a massive impact because a lot of people that invest in buy-to-let are higher rate taxpayers. So it is going to hurt, I think, into the future. I don't think it'll stop necessarily those people buying who are owned now. I don't think they're all going to run away screaming and sell, although that is rumoured to be in some places, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, I work quite closely with Savills. I've got me and a few other people. They've got a fantastic property research department with 25 very, very bright people in it. And they presented these numbers at Resi last week, which is quite interesting. So if you bought this property pre-budget that we have, so when the higher mortgage rate tax relief hasn't been taken away, they estimate that you'd have a surplus of 2,500. Now, bearing in mind they're working on a mortgage rate of about 3%. Whether we'll keep that, I don't know what you're working to. Savills were looking at in 5 years' time a higher priced property, slightly lower loan to slightly higher loan to value, I guess, and working at it on a 5% mortgage rate. And suddenly, today's market, you're spending an awful lot of money just to get £1,000 back at the end of the day. Boiler costs £3,000. All these it is very, very easy for higher rate taxpayers, once that mortgage tax relief has gone, to end up slipping into negative cash flow. Now, I've run some figures. I just like back of fag packet figures, quite frankly, that make sense in my head and are nice and easy to keep in my mind. And this is where it is interesting, because I think the buy-to-let returns have changed substantially. From my calculations, if you buy a property at a 75% loan to value, if you take the average yield of 5%, and I do have a 40-page compliance document of where all my numbers come from, because we do work with mortgage companies and insurance companies, and I've learnt that I have to prove my figures, and you're very welcome to it. So, and if you say a 4% mortgage, that property will achieve 125-30% rent versus the mortgage, but you will be your purchaser will be in negative cash flow. Now, those are not unusual figures. So the days that, for me, I don't know that actually working that out without working the end result and what net income, but it's a nasty surprise when I run this through property clinics with my landlords. And I'm not sure that that system works or protects the consumer anymore, which is what I care about. So what has worked for buy-to-let? Definitely house price growth has been absolutely phenomenal since the mid-90s. Tends to beat inflation, and we've got all the figures from Nationwide and everybody else that says property will beat inflation over time. And the other thing where buy-to-let is fantastic, and I never recommend now anybody buys a property without building in capital growth today. I'm trying to say to them, don't believe remember what happened in the worst times during Sarah Beanie's programme, when they all bought properties and it wasn't going quite so well, and soon enough the property programme disappeared because everybody was losing money left, right and centre. You can buy property at a genuine discount. You can't do that with other financial investments. You can't go out and buy some cheap stocks and shares from somebody that's trying to sell those. So that is a massive, massive benefit. So that is where property works. The annual rental increases are fascinating because They do not typically beat inflation. We are hearing in the news, and I have no idea where this is coming from. Rents are spiralling out of control. All my landlords and letting agents are going, are they? Where? Where's that happening? And we've had lots and lots of things. We know there's 3 different rates of rental inflation. The first one is majority of landlords renting to an existing tenant, if they renew, they will not increase the rent. So we get situations, particularly in London, where they've been renting to somebody at £800 a month for 5 years, and then they rent it out to somebody else because that person's going, and suddenly it's £1,200 a month. That plays havoc with rental indices that I watch, I can assure you. But when you start looking elsewhere, we've done a lot of work with all the rental indices and getting all the people together. I run the Belvoir one. We work with LSL, we work with Countrywide, and we all had a kind of away day with the Office of National Statistics. Over the last 10 years, on average, rents increase at 2%. Inflation is 3%. So you can see that on average, we know that they have pretty much kept pace with earnings. And when I do the Belvoir Index, I like stats, but I don't think they tell the whole story. So I ring 30, 40 of the agents, speak to them, and one of the very interesting things that we had is even where supply was lower than demand, you might get a little bit of a wave of an increase in rents, but it capped. Even in London, it just kept capping and stopping because people literally can't afford what's in their back pocket. So they can't pay more even when supply is higher than demand, which is unusual. And the only way really to have beaten that is HMOs have generated some amazing income, and there's some very, very wealthy people doing very well out of HMOs. But the maintenance is extraordinarily high. We've got all the problems with the local authorities who all seem to have their own rules on them. And also there are so many property investment companies that have peddled the HMO model that there is now starting to be quite a severe oversupply in areas across the country. So in Nottingham, we've got real problems, partly because of change in policy on Article 4, and partly because they've just been sold too many, quite frankly. So there is nowhere to go with those. If somebody's bought with cash, they will have had some great growth initially, but from my view, it restricts their growth ongoing. And I don't think people understand that at all. I think they have, and what makes it worse is there's a landlord that writes, she's a very, very good journalist, and I really rate her as a journalist, but she went out and told everybody in the Telegraph, if you're over 55, only buy properties with cash, because you won't have time to pay off the mortgage. Now, stop me if I'm wrong, that really is not a sensible way to do buy-to-let investment. Because quite frankly, you will probably, in some areas like London, get far more money out of just putting your money into through a financial advisor. And yes, you get some capital growth, but if it's income you're after, that property is not going to deliver that much to you. And it's crazy that we allow, or people are allowed to go out with this information, because it is wrong to tell everybody that. That is not correct. Buy-to-let works, and one of the reasons is because you gear the investment. Full stop. So there shouldn't be 30% of landlords walking around owning property ongoing with cash. Yes, buy cash initially, get the deal of the century, get the property in a good order, but then mortgage it. So if you could all please go and talk to those 30% of landlords that hold with cash and make them change their mind. Good news for you, Kate's happy, consumers being looked after. Thing I love about the mortgage side of things, even with the recent news, is that it helps mitigate against inflation. If a property is worth, if you buy a property for cash with £100,000, it's got to go up by 3% each year. Well, they're not going up by 3% each year if you do not live in London. And you'll see that in a minute, how bad that is. And you still get the 20% mortgage relief, tax relief. So there's still a benefit there from that perspective. So for me, buy-to-let works from a capital growth perspective, unless you're doing something very specialist in terms of HMOs that generates the income. And if you look, one of the things I get frustrated about is buy-to-let should be measured against what that money could do with a financial investor. And so I work very closely with Chase de Vere, for example, and all the work that I do on buy-to-let, what buy-to-let delivers, Chase de Vere then deliver me the numbers that with the same investment, what could they deliver as a financial investment, and what's the difference between the two. And we started that process for dispatches when there was all this property versus pension thing. Well, rental income is no match for pension income at all. One is taxed heavily, one will never be taxed heavily. It just won't. And we've seen the change. It's the first shot across the bows that we've had now on the rental side. So for me, buy-to-let works where you see great capital growth. One of my favourite places at the moment actually is not London. I'm not a fan of investing here for me personally. If I was going anywhere, I'd go to Cambridge. Just phenomenal economic growth, phenomenal opportunities with properties in that area. Everybody talks about Hackney and this great growth that it's had. It's really interesting. The flats have done okay, but the real growth and price growth in Hackney is from the houses. It's just phenomenal. And I've seen people buy properties. So where this one, you buy this property for £250,000 in Hackney in 2001. A flat wouldn't have been that far off either price-wise. There wasn't that much difference if it was a similar size. Flats doubled in growth, but it's the houses. And then when you look into Hackney, there's hardly any of them, which is why they've actually grown. So all of Hackney's price figures are all completely and utterly distorted. And when you add up lots of those distortions to an average, bad news, because buy-to-let is all about a property on a street these days. Averages are the nightmare for me. And this is where my big worry is because what is happening in these places, particularly after the outrageous sales from everybody in the industry on the city centre flats, that is a big disaster, and I am amazed that it's not hit the headlines more. So if we take Sunderland, this is a minor failure. A minor failure. The biggest failure in Sunderland are the £180,000 flats that are now selling out for 80 grand. Now, I don't know how, if you estimate in your lifetime, there are some young people in here, they might recover that price, but they ain't going to do it in my lifetime. Somebody sold it at that price, somebody agreed that that price was worth it, and somebody probably stuck a mortgage on it. And they are going to go utterly bankrupt. Take Nottingham, where I'm from. I can show you these all day. We've got thousands and thousands of them. And they're still selling. You can buy, in our area, you can buy two-bed flat properties, like terraces, for the same price. So why would you buy a flat with service charges and lifts? Because lifts are very expensive. Best bit of advice somebody gave me was never, ever, probably bar London, buy a flat with lifts in it. For the simple reason the costs are extortionate and they will just eat into your buy-to-let profits. Now you might say, well, don't worry, Kate, because we're all based in London, or we're doing London mostly. Well, Barking and Dagenham has got its bad news stories too. Admittedly, they're a little harder to find, and yes, there might be lease issues and stuff like that. But we have to get out of this habit of believing, firstly, what we read in the newspapers, which the industry is still too guilty of doing, and secondly, if you're certainly going out and you're doing mortgage business for people outside London, a lot of Londoners I know, favourite places, Nottingham, Sunderland, Manchester, Leeds. Everybody's getting very excited about Northern Ireland at the moment. Prices up 11% year on year. How much did they fall by? 50. So it's like, oh good, only 39 to go. So yes, it might be a good time to get in, but that's a pretty disastrous thing for those people that have lived there over time. So how does this kind of reflect on the future? My concern moving forward is that house price inflation won't necessarily continue at the rate that we have in the past. Lots of reasons for that. We have restrictions in London, for example, that have come in now where it is restricted. The amount you can borrow at 4.5 times your income, that is being restricted. There is a mood in the government that actually big house price increases aren't the best thing in the world, and that's reverberated through the industry as well. So there are moves to kind of control that. Actually, somebody has decided that we have got a housing crisis and we better go build some more. So one of the reasons prices don't go up that much in Nottingham, and our house prices are exactly the same as they were in 2003, is because we've got lots of room. So we just build all over the place. We have a lovely time. So we have lots and lots of new builds. And of course that suppresses house price inflation. I'm not expecting you to kind of read everything on this, but this was kind of a real showstopper for me. Particularly on the cash investment and why mortgaging and gearing is so important. So if you take on the right-hand side, the average, so we'll take London. So Greater London, this is last 10 years, if you like. It is from last year, so these figures will have improved a little bit, so they'll be slightly better than you see here. 82% increase, fantastic, an average of an 8.9%. But that halves even in London when you take into account inflation. So the Telegraph going out telling everybody to buy with cash is not helpful. It really isn't helpful, and you need to fight against that because that's bad advice. I write to them and I go, I really don't think you should have done that. And as their buy-to-let person in the past, you can imagine how narked I was. Now then, I come from the lovely East Midlands. So this is the world I live in on a daily basis. If I'd have bought a house for £100,000 in 2003-4, it is now worth 85, minus all the costs of buying and selling. So this is where inflation, and I have yet, landlords think I'm amazing because I put this information up. It's just inflation. It isn't clever. So it is really important that we understand, and when we're looking at investment, and certainly outside of London and areas that have the potential for house price growth, Liverpool is 30% down still on 2007. And that's in nominal terms, that's not when you add inflation. So it's really, prices are about half. They get some areas that are doing really well, and the more lucrative areas, but the more lucrative areas are rubbish at yield. So they're probably going, danger is they'll end up going cash flow negative for higher rate taxpayers. So that's the kind of, we're in a real sort of bit of a catch-22 with the numbers. There's lots of forecasts out there. I put them up on property checklists. We monitor every quarter how well we're doing. But I do think these are interesting. So if we take the UK, Savills are predicting that 2% growth this year. Probably that's a little light maybe in terms of land registry figures I've seen. Good growth 16 and 17, but then falling back 18 and 19. Again, if you take the East Midlands where I am, that's about the same. But you take Wales, it's not looking so good there. And what's interesting is, having analysed all the price increases since 2000 for the majority of places around the UK, the average increase was about 5%, bar London where you're talking about 7%. Now, there's 5% is not appearing in many of these things, and that's why I think we've all got to be aware when our clients are buying that this idea you just buy property and it just constantly goes up in value doesn't necessarily work. It really doesn't. It's also why, for anybody holding property at the moment, I was horrified at a landlord seminar I did a few months ago, and Londoners are the worst, because nobody put their hand up. I said to them, so, how many people have been to your mortgage broker in the last 6 months? And they all did exactly what you did, not one of them put their hand up. So I then said to them, and this does work, because you have to kind of jolt them out of their sort of security, if you like, because they've done well in London and therefore they don't make their money always work so hard. I went, right, put your hand up if you want the banks and building societies to make more money out of you. And they're like, oh no, we don't want that. I said, right, then what are you all doing sitting here? Get out there and go see your broker. Because it is imperative. Most people could solve their mortgage tax relief problem by coming out to see you guys today. They really, really could. And they should be seeing you twice a year, in my opinion. That's what they should be doing. And you've got to get them out there. You almost have to go to their home, knock on the door, drag them out. I don't care how you do it. Obviously, no physical violence involved. But they need your help. Because if you don't go out there and grab them, landlords kind of sit in this little sort of, they almost put their head in the sand a little bit, really. And they're doing this because they feel let down by the financial services industry. Remember. So actually you've got to drag them kicking and screaming back into your world because they need you. They really do need you, and you've got to work hard to get them out because it's not going to be as great as it has done in the past. And if you're sitting, remember, so we're talking Northwest, you're going to get 13% growth over the next 5 years. How much did I say Liverpool was down? 30. It's not overly exciting unless you're going to buy now. But there's a lot of people who are trouble there that need help on their remortgaging side of things. Rental income might start slipping as house prices are kind of almost divorced from wages now. Rental income might start having to slip from that too. Rental income is very, as far as the amount that people pay, it is about a third of their salaries. Don't believe anything you're told from anybody else. Bar London, where it is a lot higher, it's pretty much, and that's, if you take, I always think, if I've got 3 or 4 surveys that agree with each other, they're the ones I'm going to focus on. And that's pretty much what they say. But there is certainly an opportunity now for that to start increasing because we are so short of stock and because renters are renting for different reasons. Renters quite like renting now. I know nobody wants to kind of admit it, but they don't all want to rush out and buy properties. They really don't. There was some great guys at Resi who were just saying, oh, they don't want to own anything, youngsters these days. They go hire, they get one of Boris's bikes and off they go, and they borrow a car, and they want to all be entrepreneurs, so they're all little Alan Sugars, well, they're all quite tall to me, quite frankly, Alan Sugars running around the place, and they don't want to be tied in. And they've just watched everybody go into negative equity. So it's a very, very different world for them out there. So a lot of people are very happy to spend money on renting, and we are seeing a massive cultural shift. And honestly, don't let anybody tell you differently. And if you're not sure, just get a bunch of 20-year-olds into your offices and start chatting to them. It's an amazing experience. They just live in a whole new world, and it's fascinating. Now, rent controls, I'm like, yay! Rent controls, that's brilliant news. And all my landlords are going, no, it isn't. I'm going, yes, it is. None. I said, how many of you have increased your rents over the last 5 years? No hands, or a few. I go, well, if you have rent controls, it says in your contract, you can increase your rents by this much every single year. And Kate has to go out and say, you must increase your rents by this much every year, just in case your costs go up more than the rent controls allow. You've got to keep increasing at that rate, just like social housing and large landlords have done all of these years. The other beauty is if rent controls come in, all the wonderful institutional investors that the government's worked damned hard on getting in here will go. Quite a lot of them already talking about not touching Scotland with a barge pole. That's a lot less stock, and there are going to be more renters around. So I never worry about rent controls from our perspective. I worry about it from the existing tenants' perspective because they get a good deal and that's going to be wiped away. And actually, we don't need it when you have a perfect market that grows in line with wages. What you do need is to enforce the bad landlords that do put silly price increases through or let out properties to 15 people at a time when it's a 3-bed. They'd be a lot better off concentrating on that end of the market. And you can see on the rental forecast, London is, they're putting in London at quite a high rate, and they've never really done that before as Savills. So, and this is the mainstream market, I haven't done prime, but they do them separately. But you can see pretty much in line with the normal inflation that we would kind of expect moving forward, which is a good thing, because actually there has been there's no way rents have kept up with inflation over the last 5 or 6 years. If you are talking to your existing landlords, great conversation with them is, when did you increase your rents last? Because if they haven't increased them for the last 5 years, which a lot of them won't, they need to come in, get your advice on remortgaging, and they need to look at increasing their rents now. We know that all the indices, it was amazing. So October, November last year, we saw all the indices with rents starting to go up, and we had seen lots of things as flat as a pancake prior to that. And it coincided exactly with wage increases being higher than inflation. You almost could time it almost to the day. It's incredible. So there is definitely a relationship there. So what are landlords going to do now? One of the problems we've got is landlords and letting agents are getting kicked badly by the media. And a lot of people are just going, well, I'm not doing it anymore. I'll give an example. Coming up to the election, I was told on a regular basis and wrote how outrageous it was that landlords were taking housing benefit. Well, let me give you an example of somebody that did take housing benefit. We had a flat, we bought it for my husband because he was working down south. We always rented out a room, and they decided to make him field base. We wanted to keep a southern base just in case, because we knew we could always get a job on the M4 corridor. It was run by the freehold was a housing association, 70% of the tenants were social, and we had a fantastic mums there with single mums with kids. And it was a wonderful place to live, and there were great schools. We could have taken £900 a month rent from a professional, no problem whatsoever. But we actually decided to take somebody off the council waiting list because I felt it was a responsible thing to do. And we rented it out to them to £800 a month. Now, apparently, I am an evil landlord because I took £800 a month and I took £1,200 a year, less than I could do, and I took somebody off a council waiting list and gave them a beautiful flat with a brand new £3,500 bathroom that we put in because we didn't know Doug was going to be moved off somewhere else. I don't think I was evil. I think I was doing the right thing. And all that will happen in the future is if they penalise, I can't understand why you'd penalise a landlord for renting to somebody on housing benefit, whereas successive governments, you didn't want to build social homes. That's the problem. So all I will say is, right, if you're going to penalise landlords on housing benefits, only take professional tenants. Well, I'm not sure that's going to help the housing situation at this moment in time, and I think it would be a great shame. I do think landlords are going to be forced to look and understand buy-to-let better because I think it's going to be harder to make money. It's certainly hard to get deals, really hard. I've never seen stock levels so low. Letting agents and estate agents seriously take them out to dinner and give them a cup of tea because they are having an awful time trying to get stock. It's just not there. Average time people are moving now is about 20 years. Used to be about 15 long term. Imagine the stock that disappears at that rate. I think there will eventually, which I'm happy about, be more concentration on capital growth and back to the real reason why buy-to-let delivers, which is long-term capital growth. However, I haven't seen capital growth in Sunderland for an awful long time, and I can't see it now. It does give good yields, but I still think capital growth-wise, there's nothing there. There's no population increase, they've got tons of properties, there's nothing to grow prices in that area at all. So I think that might be restricted. What I would love to see and what I encourage all landlords to do now, because they have to build that capital growth in from the start, is as much as they can buy with cash, get properties that they can bring back to life, or just build. Build. We've got a new thing called custom build coming out. Won't sort of chat about that now, happy to talk about it afterwards. Amazing policy change, and I hope that that's as good for potential landlords and for yourselves, because we need new properties, we need new stock. We cannot just keep switching stock from one tenure to the other, which is what we've done very successfully over the last 25 years, and now landlords are getting blamed for housing benefit costs. Go figure. Having talked to 40 agents last week around the country, it is fascinating to see some landlords aren't worried at all about the mortgage tax relief. Others are going, that's it, I'm selling my whole portfolio. I think, and I'm going to investigate this now because it's kind of, it's not even made it to the back of my fact packet as a calculation, but I think what we're going to find is that landlords who are not seeing the capital growth probably aren't going to see the income generation now, or they're going to have their pockets hit. Or they'll have seen a ton of capital growth and they're just like, I've had enough. Nobody wants me to do this. I'm getting slagged off every day for being a landlord. I'm just going to give up and don't. I think there's going to be a particular issue where we've got housing benefit tenants. So there's a particular issue there. Less so in London, but certainly when you go to other areas where sort of whole areas are just housing benefit. And I think where the landlords are going to realise the capital growth's not coming through as they thought, then I think they will sell up. They're quite fickle, so if they see some nervousness or they don't see it doing, they will just let it go. We have to remember buy-to-let is now 20 years old pretty much. I think everybody's forgotten that. This is the time when most of them will exit because they came in the 90s. And there's a very different set of people. We're doing some research at the moment, which I'll let out shortly. There's a huge number, the majority of landlords now are over 55. And that is interesting because if the government decides after the next round, which I think they will be thinking about, of taking the other 20% tax relief away, I think the first won't have huge amounts on existing people, but I think it will slow down the numbers coming into buy-to-let. But if they take away the other 20%, that's going to hurt effectively pensioners. And it's really important we understand that that's going to be an issue. And will their kids keep the properties on, or are they just going to sell them and then they'll go back into home ownership? So we are going into the first sort of stage, if you like, of exit time. We just don't know what will happen. But we know that loads of people exited last year from the market. A lot of people had come in 2005-06, tons of them just let go because they realised capital growth weren't there, it was hassle, and they just weren't bothered. So they just let those go. I suppose from an industry perspective, for me, buy-to-let is a financial investment, full stop. Full stop. And it's a lot of money, hard-earned money, taxed money that people are investing. I personally don't believe anybody should be allowed to invest in a buy-to-let property until they have seen an independent financial advisor first. The problem I have is that the reason they're investing in property is because they were let down by an independent financial advisor, so they don't want to see them. So it's a little bit of a sell job. So I talk about tax and I talk about, well, of course, you've got everything in a trust. And they go, I'm sorry? Everything in a trust? No. Oh, okay. So your kids are going to be screwed on tax then. Are they? That's outrageous. And they know, we do a lot of seminars around the country. We reckon 95% of landlords hold property in the incorrect legal way. Incorrect legal way. Joint tenancy, bad idea. No trust, bad idea. They shouldn't, we have to work together to get them to do this stuff. And we're not doing a good enough job on their behalf. Let me give you a good example. If I'm earning £50,000 and I come to you because I want to get into buy-to-let and I'm buying to let because I've got 3 kids and my rental income is going to be £10,000, what am I going to lose? Child benefit. I'll probably lose all my child benefit. Are we letting them know that? Are we advising of that? They don't go to see an independent financial advisor, they can end up with no extra money. None at all. And we've put them in that situation because we're not linking up on the financial advice side. And it's really important that we have to do that. For me, you also need to know, I don't know how many people I have, I do these property clinics around the country, and people keep coming up to me and going, I'm investing in Wales. And I'm going, well, that's lovely. What about the new rules? What new rules? Does everybody know the new rules in Wales? Have you got people coming to you? You've got to know the new rules in Wales. We have 4 sets. We don't just have 4 sets of letting law. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, England. We also have a ton of local authority rules and regulations, which are a nightmare when it comes, certainly things to Article 4. Oxford, full licensing. Newham, full licensing. These guys need to know about it. We've got a situation here where if the guys had joined the London rental standard, they wouldn't be in the situation they are. Bizarrely, this was by the tenants. So I've got a good friend of mine, daughter ringing me up and going, I've got a bit of a problem. I've been in the property for 7 weeks and they're saying I've got to pay £275 for the credit checks. I've given my deposit over to one of the other tenants because the other tenant left and that tenant, they gave him his deposit back between them, so they've taken my money. And I'm going, oh my God, this is a nightmare. If we as an industry don't get the landlords to understand that they need to belong in London to the London rental standard, other accreditation schemes, we're not doing right by the private rental sector between us. And we have to do that. These rules can be crippling. Imagine we're already in negative cash flow and now I've just got to pay another £500 in a licence that I didn't know was coming up. We have to know these things. I also, drives me bonkers. Anybody here from the legal profession? They know you don't usually get on very well, actually. You get on well with some of them. But what on earth are you doing the same legals as you would for a first-time buyer? Are you mad? No wonder so many people are running around legally owning stuff in the wrong way. It is outrageous that we do the same conveyancing for a buy-to-let investor that we do for a first-time buyer. It is bonkers. What about electrical gas safety certificates? What about the fact that if you've got an EPC with F&G, you're not going to be able to let it out shortly? They should know that. They should be advising people on that. What if it's an HMO? Do they know all the rules and regulations? How are they going to keep up with the rules and regulations? How's that legal company going to stop their landlord going to jail? I think that's part of their responsibility. But no, legals just bog standard, and there's a lot of landlords in trouble as a result, including ones that buy leasehold properties that have a clause in it that says you can't rent to tenants. That's quite a popular one. That's somebody not doing their job. So for me, really important that anybody in the industry and buy-to-let investors really understand the rules. If you just want to do one simple thing to look after your clients and keep me quiet and happy, which is a good thing, because I can be quite loud, the government produced, and a lot of us worked hard on this, a how to rent guide. You can download it, and all I'd ask is all your existing landlords, anybody that is looking to buy-to-let, please give them this list. It's not a coincidence that it is in the form of a checklist, because it's easy to read and it's easy to understand, and it explains clearly about the legals of buy-to-let. I would never, whatever capacity I was working with a landlord, allow them to buy. I have grabbed people by lapels saying, please don't buy without a gas electric safety certificate. There's still 10% of people out there from my latest research letting to people without a gas safety certificate. But they've missed it somewhere along the way. And also, I find it extraordinarily odd that, and this is really aimed at lenders, are more than happy to lend money, £500,000, £1 million to somebody that has no idea what they're doing whatsoever. No credentials for letting, and they go, I'm going to self-manage, because everybody slags off letting agents. And they don't think, and what doesn't happen is they don't go, do you know what, if you do Arla, Ricks and Nows, they have this thing called client money protection. Because if I was a lender, I would want them to let through somebody that had client money protection, not the Oliver chap that's just gone bust, owing tens of thousands of people, which might, tens of thousands of pounds. So I would always say, just go with these guys, support the rest of the industry, the good guys. And we work really closely with the Residential Landlord Association. They do so much for their landlords. For me, it's one or the other. There is no way you can keep up with the legals of lettings. And join yourself, join the RLA. Understand, if you're working with buy-to-let investors, you've got to be as knowledgeable to help them through. One thing I do get back from mortgage lenders, and I know a lot of your brokers, is, well, is it really our responsibility? Yeah, flipping is. If it's a landlord's responsibility and a letting agent's responsibility to provide a robust, legally let property, it is insurance companies' responsibility, it is mortgage and brokers' responsibility, and it's the responsibility of the local authority and the government. And there's no getting away with that. Not in my book. Shaking sticks. So we all have to take responsibility. That's me done.
Thank you, Kate.